It's not done it yet.
No, I think I normally see a red dot up here. That's it. Lovely. Do you want to pop yourself off on mute as well, Liz? That'd be great. Sorry, Paige. Okay, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anjanette Fraser. I'm a BANT registered nutritionist of 16 years, and today I'm going to be talking to you about controlling cholesterol. So hopefully you'll enjoy this next 45-minute journey with me, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the end. Please type any questions in the chat box and we'll hopefully get round to answering as many of those as possible. So very much from my point of view, when I do these webinars, is about the science. My background, as I say, been a registered nutritionist for 16 years, and I'm in the final stages of an MSc in nutritional medicine at Surrey University. So I very much like to bring you the latest science. And in fact, even just this morning, I was reading an interesting article that I just found on social media about cholesterol. So I'll share that information with you as we proceed. Now, I like to kind of set the scene with my webinars, and this one here, I thought maybe you might not know this. 45% of all non-communicable diseases are from cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease is still right up there in terms of the biggest killers for us in the UK. 80% of cardiovascular disease are associated with modifiable factors. Now, what do I mean by modifiable factors? Modifiable means things that you can change. So 80% of the cardiovascular deaths in the UK can be changed. Okay, they don't have to happen. There are things that you can do to reduce that number. Now, diet is obviously something we're going to be talking about today, being a nutritionist, but also it's not just about diet. Physical activity is important. Cutting out smoking, and also moderating, reducing, stopping drinking alcohol as well. So there's certainly 4 big areas that we need to think about when we're talking about heart health and particularly cholesterol. So in terms of the content for today, first of all, I want to explain actually what is cholesterol, why do we need it? Don't think of it as the bad guy, because the goal is certainly not 0. You know, the goal is not to have a cholesterol level of 0. It isn't. And then we'll look at saturated and unsaturated fats. What's the difference? Why is one maybe considered better than the other? Or maybe we need both. How to lower cholesterol. I guess if you're joining this webinar, you're thinking this is the key one for me. Now, what I've added in this new slide recently, a new approach to cholesterol, because we're maybe changing our thought on cholesterol, and I'll share that with you when we get to it. And then a brief bit on alcohol, smoking and exercise, just to round it up. So first of all, I don't want you to think of cholesterol as a bad thing. Okay, we absolutely need cholesterol, and we also need fats in our dietary fats. I know a lot of people are, thinking perhaps about their weight and wanting to reduce their fat mass and perhaps increase their muscle mass, but that doesn't mean cut out fats completely from your diet, because we do need fats. Why? Well, fats are a really good source of energy. Of course, we get energy from other areas in our food as well, but fats very much so. What about vitamins and minerals? Well, you get specifically vitamins A, D, E and K from fats. These are what we call the fat-soluble vitamins. So imagine if you didn't have some of these good sources of fat, you may be deficient in some of these vitamins. Now, what about essential fatty acids? Have you heard of that term? And the one I want to talk about, and I'll be talking about today specifically, is omega-3 and omega-6. Now, both of these are, of course, dietary fats as well. And there's an awful lot of science, particularly with relation to omega-3 in its benefit in terms of helping keep a healthy cholesterol level. But I want to caveat it slightly by saying that although, of course, I'm promoting fats and saying how fats are very important for energy, etc., they are also very calorific. So, for example, fats are 9 kilocalories per gram compared to only 4 in carbs and proteins. So they're more than double as calorific in terms of carbohydrates and proteins. So although, yes, include them in your diet, we do need to moderate them. So it does mean you can have butter, but a thin scraping of butter, not an inch on your toast. And of course, excess is linked to heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And for many of us, that's what area of concern is, that we want to reduce our risk so that we have less risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. But yes, fats are still very important. Every cell in our body, all of our organs, our skin, all of it has a fat layer for protection, but also for cell signaling, because thousands of times a day messages are passed between our cells. They're communicating, and they need the cells to be nice and flexible, and they need to be able to pass through them. And so we need a really good fat layer for that to happen. So fats are very, very important, but we need to make sure we get the right type and not too much of the bad one. So what is the government suggested daily allowance? Well, in terms of fat, generally, the government suggests that less than 35% of our total daily energy intake should come from fats. And in terms of grams, what is that? If you're looking at food labels, for men, it should be less than 95 grams, and for women, less than 70. And of which the saturated fat should be less than 11, because we always tend to think saturated fat is the bad type of fat. So therefore, we want to limit that one a little bit. So in terms of grams, men less than 30 grams a day of saturated fat, and for women less than 20 grams. So you're probably familiar with the traffic light or the color coding of food packaging, just to give us some guidance as to maybe what foods contain more saturated fat than others, because some are very surprising and you wouldn't always expect it to be that way. Now, something I want to share with you right at the start, which I kind of think it's a bit controversial, but it's showing you that we are keeping up to date with the latest science. And that is that now we're thinking that 75% of the cholesterol in our body is actually made in the liver. Okay, it's actually made by us, because, as I said right at the start, the goal of cholesterol is not to get it to zero. We need cholesterol, okay? But actually 75% of our cholesterol is made by our bodies, and 25% from food. So that's maybe a little bit different from what you're thinking, isn't it? And certainly from my point of view as a nutritionist, I spent years telling people to, cut down on certain foods because of the cholesterol effect of them. But now we're thinking actually maybe the dietary is slightly less. And actually it's our bodies that are making more of it. That's what we need to understand more on. So we need cholesterol because it's essential for our hormones. So that's for men and for women, for all ages, hormone production. It's also very important for repair of our nerves, for producing bile. You might be thinking, what's bile? Well, bile is basically something that we make that helps us to break down the fats in our diet. Think of it a bit like fairy liquid or washing up liquid. If you've done that experiment in school when you've got an oil and you've got water and you put them together and they don't mix, do they? They stay separated. But what bile does is it helps break down the fat so that it can be broken and mixed in the water. So bile is very, very important, and it's made in our liver and it's stored in our gallbladder so that when we eat, the gallbladder excretes it into our digestive system to help us break down fat. Now, we also need cholesterol for the synthesis, the creation of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is quite big in the media in the last couple of years, isn't it? We used to think about vitamin D as all about bone health and stopping or reducing the risk of fractures. But now we know it's far greater than that. Now we know it has a very important role to play in our immunity. So don't just think about cholesterol as in a bad thing, as in, furring or clogging your arteries. We need it as well for all these various different things. So we just need to moderate how much we have. Now, in terms of how we break down cholesterol, we've got different types, okay? You've got LDL, which means low density lipoproteins, and this is actually what we call the bad cholesterol. It's a transporter of your cholesterol, and what it does is it actually transports the bad fats to the artery. And it's, if you're a visual person, it's the kind of the fatty deposit on the inside of your artery that we're not so keen on, okay? Because if we have too much buildup of fat in our arteries, it means there's less area for the blood to flow, so your blood pressure will go up, but you're also at risk of this fatty plaque breaking off and blocking your artery, which leads to a stroke or a heart attack, for example. So we need to keep the LDL cholesterol to a lower level, and ideally less than 3 millimole per litre. Now, hopefully, you know this, that when you turn 40, you should have been invited by your doctor's surgery for a mini health check, and that's repeated every 5 years. Please, if you have been invited and you haven't been, please do go and get it. And if you haven't been invited, please do contact your doctor and ask where your invitation is, because every 5 years after 40, we all need to know some key numbers, and one of which is our cholesterol. They will measure your total cholesterol, but they will also measure your LDL, your HDL. They'll do your blood sugar, they'll measure your blood pressure, all these things that are really important that we don't necessarily know if they are bad at the moment, you know, because don't wait for signs and symptoms. Cholesterol is one of those that's known as the silent killer, because there are no signs and symptoms until it could be too late. So please do use the opportunity to have the check with your doctor. So your doctor will measure your LDL cholesterol, and hopefully below 3 millimoles per litre. Now, HDL, high density lipoproteins, are what we call the good cholesterol, and we like them because they move the cholesterol away from your arteries back to your liver for repackaging and elimination in your bowel motions. So we want lots of HDL, lots of good, and we want less of the LDL, the bad. So hopefully your HDL will be more than 1 millimole per litre. But as a reminder, there are no signs or symptoms of high cholesterol. So please do not wait for your body to tell you that you have high cholesterol, because it will not. Okay, you do need to get it checked out. So when we talk about these bad fats, these saturated fats, what are we thinking about? Well, why are they bad? Well, saturated fats, and I've got an example here, this lovely colourful picture, actually what they do is they increase the low density lipoproteins, the bad ones, the ones which build up on the inside of your arteries. Saturated fats increase those. So where do you find saturated fats? Predominantly things like red meat. So this is not saying cut out red meat, okay? Government guidelines are no more than twice a week. So think about how often you're having mince or bacon, and you know, could you, sausages, etc., beef burgers, all those kind of things, can you reduce them to no more than twice a week? What about cheese? I think I've got a slide coming up on cheese in a second, and it shows you the breakdown of the various different types of cheeses in terms of how much saturated fat, which ones have got more saturated fat than others. Cream, yes, okay, you know, maybe special occasions and is okay, and in small amounts, but you know, every now and then is fine, but please don't overdo it. Creme fraiche, of course, you can get the reduced fat of that if you're using that in your cooking. Same for sour cream. Butter, generally nutritionists would prefer butter over margarine any day, but again, you know, it's all about moderation. It's using a small amount rather than putting an inch on your toast, and preferably not using ghee or lard when you're cooking. And I've got a slide coming up on coconut, because that can be a little bit controversial at the moment. We're still a little bit unsure on coconut oil, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. So yes, you'll also find saturated fat in coconut milk and coconut cream. Perhaps you're making some Thai curries, or you're using it in your cooking, so maybe having a reduced fat option. Cakes, biscuits, pastry, of course, we tend to use a lot of butter and fats in those, don't we? So trying to reduce those as much as possible. And chocolate is also quite a good source of saturated fat. So if you can, dark chocolate would be better. And again, you know, eat it. It's still, life is still worth enjoying, but moderate it. So those are all examples of the saturated, or what we call the bad fats. So what about good fats, the unsaturated fats? Well, these are actually the ones that can reduce the LDL, the cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and also increase the good cholesterol, the HDL. So these ones are absolutely magic. They're reducing the bad and they're upping the good, and that's what we want. So what examples have we got of what you should include in your diet? Well, first of all, we've got monosaturated fats. Mono means one, they've got one double bond in there. More unsaturated fats. So olive oil is the classic example. So if you use an oil, perhaps in cooking, then the best ones would be either oil or rapeseed oil. Either one of those is the better one to use if you're going to heat it. But of course, if you're making salads and things like that, they are really good to drizzle on some as a dressing. What about avocado? half an avocado a day would be really good as well. Good source of fiber as well. And nuts. And when we say nuts, why not have a variety? Don't just stick to one nut, you know, whether it's Brazil, almond, walnut, cashew. If you eat lots of different nuts, then you get lots of different variety of vitamins and minerals. But certainly, you know, about a handful a day would be a good snack, maybe mid-afternoon with a piece of fruit, something like that, or maybe on some yogurt would be a really, really good snack, and make sure that you're getting some of these really good unsaturated fats. So what about polyunsaturated? Poly means many, so it's got lots of double bonds in there, and examples of that are flax seeds, sunflower, sesame seeds, walnuts, pine nuts, and oily fish. Now, as a nutritionist, we absolutely love all of these. For me, that would be, I put about a soup spoonful of flax seeds on my cereal in the morning, but maybe you might want to add some to a smoothie or into some soup. Add some sunflower or sesame seeds to the nuts that you eat mid-afternoon. Walnuts, yeah, a couple of those each day, and oily fish. Magic, you know, once or twice a week. The government guidelines are fish twice a week, of which one should be oily. So whether that is salmon, or if it's sardines, if it's mackerel, for me, salmon and mackerel are my two favorites. One of my really quick go-to meals is to get some granary or seeded toast, pop it in the bread, put it in the toaster, and whilst it's cooking, I'll get half an avocado and I'll mash it, and I'll put that on my toast, and then I'll put some mackerel on there, because you can get mackerel in a little tin that has been beheaded and it's filleted, so it's literally good to go. You just need to drain off the oil, and I put that on top of my avocado and on top of my toast, and for me that ticks all the nutrition boxes. Lovely oily fish, I've got the avocado in there as well, and it's on some granary or seeded toast. So really good ways to get some good fats into your diet. So a bit more about these polyunsaturated fats. So as nutritionists, we predominantly focus more on what we call omega-3 rather than the omega-6. And that's because omega-6 we tend to get actually enough of in our diet, but there's also the potential risk that omega-6 might actually be slightly inflammatory, and we don't want that. We want an anti-inflammatory diet, and that is omega-3. So omega-3, or essential fatty acids, can be broken down into what we call EPA and DHA. So I'll get a bit technical on you here, okay? So you might see on packaging it says things like really good source of omega-3, and if you saw that on fish you'd be thinking brilliant, and you're right, that is really, really good, because fish is a very good source of what we call long chain omega-3 fatty acids. So it's the long chain, and it's these long chain fatty acids that the research has been done in terms of heart health and depression and joint health, etc. But you might also see on packets it says, you know, good source of omega-3 on maybe walnuts or flaxseed, something like that, or rapeseed. And in all honesty, they are a good source of omega-3, but those are examples of what we call the short chain omega-3. So they're not quite as beneficial as the long chain. And it's also harder to convert them to the EPA and DHA, which is the long chain fatty acids that we actually want. So if you're okay with eating fish, then eating oily fish is absolutely the best way to get this into your diet. If you're not keen on eating fish, then you could consider taking a fish oil supplement. And maybe you're vegetarian, vegan, or just don't like eating fish or taking fish oil, then you could also take an algal oil, which actually comes from algae. And that is, you know, a non-animal source of omega-3, and that can be purchased from health food stores. So there is an option for every single one of us to increase the amount of omega-3 in our diet, because of why? Omega-3 is the thing that increases your HDL, your good cholesterol, and we want more of that. We want high HDL, good cholesterol, because we want it to move the cholesterol from the arteries back to the liver for packaging. So where we can, focus on eating more oily fish, and if we're not keen on that, then algal oil is the other option. So then I do get asked quite a bit about what about some of the other cholesterol lowering foods like stanols and sterols. What about those? Are they any good? Do they work? Actually, yes, they do work. In studies and reports, they've shown to reduce the bad cholesterol by anywhere from 7 to 12%, and that's taking about 1.5 to 3 grams of them per day. Naturally, we find them in things like fruit, vegetables, nuts, but they may be insufficient. We maybe need a bit more. It's all right me saying as a nutritionist, obviously we'd much rather what we call the food first approach. So we'd much rather you get all the benefit from your food rather than taking a supplement. Sometimes though, we just can't quite get enough. So you may need to think about taking a fish oil. But if you are on any medication, you should always consult with your doctor before you take any supplement, just in case there are any contraindications. So maybe you might want to think about some of these stanols or sterols. They can be expensive is the only thing. They are similar in structure to cholesterol, and the way they work is that they actually compete for absorption in your intestine. So instead of your intestine absorbing the cholesterol through your food, it's going to absorb, because it's so similar in these stanols and sterols, it absorbs them instead, so that the cholesterol from your food just goes right through your body and out to the other side. So that's in a basically simplistic way how they work. So they do work, but they can be a little bit expensive. Now, what about this controversial one? What about coconut oil? Do you use it? What do you think about it? So the interesting thing about coconut oil, and the bit that's really foxed us, is that it is actually a saturated fat. And yeah, we tend to think saturated fats are the bad fat, don't we? So how can it possibly be good? But interestingly, some of the studies have shown that it does actually raise your good cholesterol. But it also raises your bad cholesterol. In fact, it seems to raise all good and bad cholesterol. So we're a bit lost on this, because as time goes, we've actually had not very long to conduct these clinical trials. If we have conducted them, they've been trials of very short duration, and we also therefore want to make sure that we have longer duration trials before we start recommending anything. And also they've been relatively small. There haven't been big numbers of people doing these trials. So I think the safe thing to say is that maybe, as in moderation is fine, but certainly shouldn't be the only fat that you use for cooking. But every now and then should be absolutely fine until we know a bit more fact about it. So here's that cheese slide I promised you, and this is making me feel very hungry right now. So this is a list of the saturated fat content in all the different types of cheeses. And isn't it interesting when you look, like at the bottom there, you've got cottage cheese, 3.2 grams of saturated fat per 100 grams compared to mascarpone. I think I use mascarpone when I make carrot cake. So maybe I might not make so much carrot cake from now on. But also look, cheddar's quite high up there, isn't it? So maybe you could switch, I don't know, if you're making, I've got a 6 and an 8-year-old. So I like to, if I can, make food with them, like pizzas. So maybe instead of putting grating cheddar cheese, maybe mozzarella might be a better option on the pizza instead. And goat's cheese halloumi. So it's interesting, isn't it? Maybe you can switch to a cheese that's a lesser saturated fat, but still a cheese and still tasty. So how about in general terms then, how can we help you lower your cholesterol level? Well, we've talked a little bit about increasing fibre by all plant sources. So not just fruit and vegetables, but that means nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, legumes, lentil, pulses, all of those are all plant sources. All of those are going to help to reduce your cholesterol, because you get what we call soluble and insoluble fibre, and they both work to soak up the cholesterol, and a bit like a sponge, if you can imagine a sponge going through your intestines and just gathering all the debris and all the excess fat and helping to remove it. So fibre is very, very important for that. including whole grains rather than white refined. And that's because as nutritionists, we're always trying to encourage people to eat food that is close to nature as possible. So whole grains haven't been as broken down as refined as much as, like white bread, for example. There's less heat that's been involved. So there's more nutrient dense in whole grains. And it takes your body a lot longer to break down the whole grain than it does something like white bread. Oily fish at least once a week. If you want to have more than once a week, absolutely go for it. Lean meats, for me, absolutely love venison. I don't think it's that expensive. I think it's very reasonably priced, and it's very lean meat, and beautiful flavors in there, and you can get some really good cuts of that at the supermarket. Perfect if you're doing stews and things like that through the cold weather as well. Using olive oil or rapeseed oil for cooking, and remembering about how your cooking style, grilling and baking, not frying. Keeping physically active, of course, we know that that helps to reduce your cholesterol levels, and stopping smoking. We'll talk a bit more about those coming up. So in terms of more practical suggestions, things like, replacing fried things with grilled or steamed or baked foods, crisps and things like that. Maybe make your own by putting them in the oven and baking them yourself. What about cream, switching that for plain yogurt instead, or maybe fruit? Sugary cereal, have a look at the sugar content in your cereal. Is it too high? Maybe instead going for some muesli or some porridge. If you make it yourself, even better. Switching some of the fattier meats like sausages and burgers for some lean meats, things like venison, chicken, pork, etc. Instead of slicing your cheese, maybe you put sliced cheese on toast. Could you grate it? And instead of using things like ghee or butter for your cooking, instead use olive oil or rapeseed oil. Now I'm going to take a deep intake of breath here, because this is a kind of a new approach, and this is a little bit different, and this is what's emerging over the last couple of months, and I wanted to share this with you because maybe this is actually where we're going with this, because what I've talked about so far is probably not that surprising to you. It's stuff that we've heard a lot of before, but maybe what I'm about to tell you might not have heard before. So the World Health Organization suggested a long time ago that actually, we need to reduce the saturated fat in our diet, because saturated fats are the bad fats, and it leads to increasing your risk of heart disease. But actually, what we're wondering now is that actually the risk is perhaps not so great in terms of saturated fat. Maybe the risk is actually from carbohydrates. So could I just take this on mute? Sorry, thank you. There's a bit of background noise. So by looking, sorry. Thank you. If you could put yourself on mute, that would be great. So actually, by looking at your carbohydrates, so historically, we used to say that we thought cholesterol was due to saturated fats, but now we're actually wondering whether it's not actually so much the saturated fat, it's actually that people have cut down too much in their saturated fats, and instead they've replaced their diet with carbohydrates. They're eating more bread, they're eating more rice, they're eating more pasta, and that perhaps is actually what is driving these bad cholesterol levels rather than the saturated fat. And also, interestingly, when you look at fats, they don't work if you eat it as a whole, like you eat a piece of salmon or you eat some cheddar cheese. It's not just the cholesterol on its own. It comes with a whole load of other nutrients and vitamins and minerals in that food item, which means that actually helps to reduce the absorption of the fat. So actually eating it as a whole food is better as well. And not all saturated fat are equal. So, we can't say all saturated fat are bad. As we said about coconut earlier on, it's a saturated fat. That means it's therefore bad. But does it? So we need more time on that to work out actually, are all saturated fats bad? Potentially the answer is actually no, it's more complicated than we once thought it was. And there's this interesting study called the PURE study, which showed that people who had a high saturated fat diets had high bad cholesterol, the low density lipoproteins, so that's probably not surprising, is it? But they also had high good cholesterol, and that's the one that we want, okay? But interestingly, they also had low triglycerides, and triglycerides are one of the risk factors, one of the things we don't want. So high saturated fat diets improved the good cholesterol and lowered the triglycerides. Well, that's got to be good. And there was no increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So I am sorry if I'm completely confusing you in this picture, but this is exactly how we feel as nutritionists, because for a long time, we've all thought saturated fats are bad and they are all the same. But now we're realizing that actually, maybe they are not all bad. Maybe actually saturated fats could be good, particularly if they're eaten as a whole food, like in fish or like cheese. But of course, the answer is moderation until we understand a bit more about saturated fats. So this little table I've got for you here, did you know? Okay, so did you know whole grains and fibre are important for gut health? Yep, we know that. We know whole grains and fibre feed the good bacteria in our gut. But did you also know that your gut health can influence your risk of heart disease? So we need to increase more fibre. So eating, at least 5 a day. And that's because fibre creates something called short chain fatty acids, which help to reduce the creation of cholesterol in the liver. So fibre can really help to reduce our body's natural production of cholesterol. So that's got to be a good thing. Remember, 75% of the cholesterol is stuff that we make. So we need the fibre to help us reduce that a bit. Being overweight increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, but it's not just about being overweight, it's where you carry it. Pear shape isn't so bad. Apple shape is not what we want. So watch your waistline. Get your waist as small as possible. Salt increases your blood pressure, but actually magnesium, calcium, potassium can help balance it a little bit. So if you find that your blood pressure is a little bit high, perhaps your salt is a little bit high. Maybe you're adding too much salt. Of course, cut that down, but maybe you might need a bit more help. So adding more plant sources, which are also good sources of magnesium, calcium, potassium, will help to readdress that balance. Too much saturated fat is not good for your heart. Okay, that's what we used to think. But what you replace it with is just as important. Remember, we used to think saturated fat was bad for us, so we started eating too many carbohydrates, and look where it's got us, not in a good place. So instead of replacing the bad fat with carbohydrates, replace it with the unsaturated fats instead. Sleep is important because lack of sleep is linked to cardiovascular disease, and ideally 7 to 9 hours a night. And I read this fantastic study that said, it was a big study in America, and it looked at daylight savings. So when the clocks changed and people got 1 hour less sleep, the number of heart attacks went up. When people got 1 hour more sleep, the number of heart attacks went down. Just 1 hour of difference in sleep really had a dramatic effect. Stress, of course, increases your blood pressure, so to keep a handle on that. Think about your workplace stress and the risk on that. Speak to your, occupational health. Do you have an employee assistant provider? Think about mindfulness, what you can do to manage your stress. And of course, being physically active can also be beneficial for your health, because being sedentary for long periods of time increases your risk. So, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, even if it's just a brisk walk, really is beneficial for your heart. Now, what about alcohol? It's a bit controversial, this one, isn't it? Because nutritionists generally advocate the Mediterranean diet, which is a small glass of red wine a day. And there is a lot to be said for that. But of course, we're all different, aren't we? A small glass for one person could be too much, and for another person may not be much at all. But the resveratrol, so the antioxidants that are found in the red skin grape, are very, very good in keeping us young and helping, to ward off some of the risk of cardiovascular disease. But it is in moderation, and it is a small glass. In excess of a small glass, it leads to fatty liver and, of course, weight gain. So things that you can think about: alternating drinks. For every alcohol drink, have a non-alcoholic drink, swapping to a lower percentage alcohol beer or wine. Only drink when you're having a meal, therefore you're consuming less in terms of volume. Think about the glass size, instead of a big balloon glass, can you have a smaller one? Eat before you drink, so you're not drinking on an empty tummy. And if you're going out and socializing, nominate to drive. It's far cheaper, and you'll probably find everyone else will buy you the drinks for the night. So there is definitely a win-win situation there as well. And then what about smoking? Well, we know that when you smoke, it starts to play with the chemical structure of cholesterol, and it makes it stickier, okay, and also reduces the good cholesterol and damages artery walls. So really, if we can cut out smoking. And to help encourage you to do this, what happens if you decide to swap? Within days, you start to notice an improvement in your taste and smell. And within just a couple of weeks, you get less sticky blood, so that helps with your cholesterol. You get also reduced cough. You know, you're able to, your lungs are more efficient, they're able to expand better, take in more air. And then after 1 year, the risk of heart disease is half of that of what it was. Just after 1 year, what a difference, you know, massively worth it. And then in terms of exercise, I loved this. I wrote this slide when I was experiencing homeschooling, because I then reframed exercise. Instead of it being a chore, it became time to escape the children. So it was brilliant, because I could then have 10-15 minutes when I didn't have to answer maths and English questions, and it became me time, away from work, away from children. So doing things like Davina McCall, you may know her, she once said that to encourage her to do exercise, the first clothing that she puts on in the day is her active wear, because she therefore has to prioritize her exercise in the day. Because if she gets dressed in jeans or whatever, she's never going to do any exercise, because she's never going to want to put on her exercise clothes. So if you can, get dressed in your active wear at the start of the day. We all know the benefit of endorphins, making you feel good, giving you a sense of purpose and feeling valued, helping you reframe situations, thinking less negatively, and of course, energize, how you feel after that. You feel really great. Your sleep is, of course, better, because that night you're doing all the repair to all your muscles that you've been using. And most importantly, with exercise, you've got to make sure that it's something that's right for you and something that you can continue for the medium to long term. Because one thing that's very dangerous is yo-yo dieting. Okay, yo-yo dieting never works. Okay, if you drastically calorie cut, yes, you will lose weight. Yes, you may fit in that wedding dress or that bikini, but I guarantee you will end up, the vast majority of people end up weighing more than they did to start with. And that's just your biology working against you, because your body doesn't like you going into calorie deficit. Your body wants to live. So it starts to reduce the speed of your metabolism. So please, exercise, you have to think of it very similar in terms of food. Do not start thinking, right, I'm going to exercise 5 days a week, because if you can't sustain exercise 5 days a week, then do not even attempt it. You have to choose an exercise that you can do for the medium to long term, or otherwise your weight is going to go up and down all over again. So it doesn't need to be a gym membership. It could be Joe Wicks. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel that's for free. I like their Adrienne yoga. It's a bit like Joe Wicks, but it's yoga on YouTube and it's free as well. Again, it needs to be medium to long term. So then I think I've got 5 recipes I thought that I'll share with you in terms of what are, lower cholesterol eating. So the first one is something that nothing to do with cholesterol, but absolutely loved it, that got me through 2 pregnancies, was Bircham muesli, because I found in the early stages of pregnancy that, as many women do, when nausea, when you feel morning sickness, mine would come on every 2-3 hours whenever I started to get hungry. So I made Bircham muesli every 2 to 3 mornings, and I kept it in the fridge. So every 2 hours, I just have a spoonful of that, and it's fantastic because I make it and I know what's in it, and it's the kind of stuff that you have in your cupboard anyway. Okay, and it's really easy, and yeah, you can make it to last 2 or 3 days. So this is fantastic in terms of cholesterol, because you've got oats in there and you've got nuts in there, and you've got really good source of yogurt. So all of those, and a piece of fruit as well, good source of fiber. So why not try some Bircham muesli for breakfast? Now, what about some baked fish? I am the queen of anything that's one pot and anything that's quick, because I have young kids. So for me, something like a salmon fillet with a teaspoonful of pesto on the top and some grated cheese on there. Brilliant. In the oven, 10 minutes or so, done. You can't get quicker than that. That's just 10 minutes, whether you serve that with stir-fried vegetables or, a bag of salad or some steamed vegetables, whatever. Salmon is extra, good for your heart health because of all the omega-3 in there. And, it's a good source of protein as well. It will keep you full for a long time. A quick vegetarian one that I like is spinach and chickpea curry. Also here you've got really, really good sources of fibre in here as well. And it's a one pot thing, everything in one pot. Really good, really easy. And to be honest, it says 20 minutes. I think I'll do it in like 15. It's very, very quick. And even my husband, who's not vegetarian, actually really likes this. So it's quite spicy. So don't be put off thinking, oh, that wouldn't fill me. Spinach and chickpea curry, that won't last long. It does. It lasts for a very long time in your stomach. And it's really cheap to make. Really simple ingredients, so you can try that. And with the bag of spinach, put the spinach in your freezer, and therefore it lasts longer, because otherwise it starts to wilt and you waste half of it. So yeah, keep it in the freezer as a top tip. Shepherdess pie. To be honest, I struggled with an image for this one. My shepherdess pie doesn't quite look that colour, but shepherdess pie is basically shepherd's pie but vegetarian, and instead of lamb it's using lentils instead. So again, thinking about increasing your fibre to help reduce your cholesterol levels. Actually, someone made me this once when I did a retreat, and everybody absolutely loved it. So it is a really, really good recipe. Again, simple things that you all have in your cupboards. It's easy to make and tastes really, really good. And then a firm favourite in my house as a snack is a trail mix, and I put in here yogurt or chocolate coated raisins for the kids as well, just to entice them to eat a few more nuts. So don't go picking out the chocolate bits, you have to eat the nuts as well. So yeah, keeping it in an airtight jar, really good idea. It will keep for a very long time, but you're getting a lot of different sources of omega-3 and vitamins and minerals in there. Try not overdo too much of the dried fruit though. But yeah, that's really good to take if you're out and about. You can put it in your bag and take with you. And it's good if you're maybe on your bike or doing some exercise as well. So I appreciate that we have come to the end of the 45 minutes. Here's a reminder about the content of today. Of course, I don't know any of you individually, so I can't prescribe anything to you as individuals. And of course, if you're seeking to take any supplements, you need to talk to your doctor first if you're on any medication. If it's possible to stop the recording now before we go to any Q&A session.